So far we've created an application using the border layout that has a component in the north position, the center position and the south position. If we look at the end result for our log viewer interface, we can see that we have some items at the top of the window. We've a label, a JText field, a button and another button. Then we have a component in the center which is actually a JList, and then we have something down the bottom of the window which is actually another JLabel. So we have a single item in the center and a single item in the south position. But up in the north position we actually have a couple of different items. In fact, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different user interface components in the north position. Now the border layout is limited in that you can only add a single item into each location. So how are we going to add 4 items into the north position? We'll see how we can do that in this example. So first of all, I'm going to need to define my variables for the different user interface components. Working off the last example where we had 4 buttons, north, south, west, center and east, we can modify this code in order to build up the user interface that we need. So I'm going to need a label, a text box, a load button, a remove button, and I'm also going to need a label to add in the south. The center portion of this, the JList component, we will leave for another video. So let's start by defining our user interface components. We can delete the north, south, west, center, east buttons, and I'm going to add private JLabel LBL file name. So this will be a label to store the file name text beside the text box, and then I'll say private JText field, and this will be the actual text of the file name, and private J button. I'm going to need a button to load the file. I'm going to need a button to remove items from the list. And for the time being, I'm still going to place a button in the center of the border layout. I'll need one more interface component in order to build up our application. And that is something new. We haven't seen this before. This is something called a JPanel. So I'm going to define private JPanel action panel. Okay, so what kind of user interface component is a JPanel? Well, if we go back to our user interface for our log viewer, basically what we are going to do is, because we can only add one component to the north position, we're going to define a JPanel. So all of this area here that you see in the north is actually a JPanel. And then what we're going to do is we'll set the layout for that JPanel to be a flow layout, and we'll add the label for file name, the text box, the load button and the remove button to the JPanel. And then we'll add the JPanel to the north position of the border layout. So this can get a little bit complicated for very detailed layouts, but you can think about it as a kind of Russian doll situation where we actually have a container within a container. So our inner container here is a JPanel, and that JPanel will have a flow layout, and that flow layout will contain the top user interface components, and then we will add the JPanel to the border layout. So we have a JPanel called Action Panel, and what we'll do is we'll set the layout for that JPanel to be a flow layout and then add the various bits into this JPanel that can be added to the north position. So that's all of the variables that I'll need to build up this interface. And what we'll do now, down in the create user interface method, we will produce the code to do that. So first of all, because I've changed the variables, the user interface that I need, I'll need to create those. So create user interface objects, and I'll do it in the same order that I have them declared in. So I'll say lbl file name equals new JLabel file name, and then I'll say txt file name equals new okay, so txt file name equals new j text field. Let's get the spelling right. Text field. And I'm going to set the initial width of this text field to 15 characters. Should be big enough to write in our file names. And then I'll create my button load. So button load will equal new JButton. And of course we will give the text for that button as load. And I'll say button remove equals new JButton, and set the text of that to remove. And then I still have my center button for the time being, so I'll say button center equals new JButton, and again let's set the text of that to center. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is create my inner JPanel. So I'll say action panel equals new JPanel. Okay, so that's all the objects created. So I've created all of the basic ones that I need there, the labels, text field, buttons, and I've also created my new JPanel object. So remember, the JPanel is just like a container. It's just like the window. It's just like the pane that's in the window. It's going to be an inner container. So the next thing that we need to do is grab a handle to the main content pane as we've done before. So that will be container C equals get content pane and so on. And after that, what I'll do is I will then set the layout for the inner JPanel. So I can say action panel dot set layout, and the layout for the action panel, if we look at the interface, it's going to be flow layout, because I'd like all of these interface components just to line up side by side from left to right, so we can use a flow layout to do that. So we'll set the layout for the action panel, and we'll say set layout new flow layout. Now what I need to do is I need to add my components to my inner JPanel. So I need to add the file name label, the text box, and the load and remove buttons. So let's do that. So now I use action panel dot add, and the first thing I add is the label for the file name. And then I say action panel dot add, and the next thing I want to add is the text box. So that's txt. Oops, missing a bracket there. add txt file name. And then I want to add the two buttons, so it'll be action panel dot add button, and the name of the button is button load. Action panel dot add button remove. So now I have added the label, the text field and the two buttons to the flow layout that's part of this JPanel. So remember, the JPanel is an inner container, and then I'm going to add the JPanel to the border layout in the north position. So I've created the panel. I have my handle to the main content pane that's part of the JFrame window. I've added the components to my inner panel. So now all I have to do is add the components to the border layout. So I'll just say add components to border layout. So I will be adding something in the north, I will be adding something in the south, and I will be adding something in the center, but not the west and not the east. So we can delete those. So in the north position, I will want to add my action panel. In the south position, I'll want to add my message label, which I've actually forgotten to create. Have I? Yes, I have actually forgotten to create that. So I'll very quickly just add that in up here. So I'll have a label for the file name and private JLabel LBL message. So create or add the variable for the message label there, and down here then I'll want to actually create it. So LBL message equals new JLabel, and of course I'll just leave that blank for the time being. I don't want to add any text to the message label. So I'll add my action panel in the north, and then in the south I'll add LBL message, and then in the center I'll have the button just as a placeholder for the moment. So if everything has worked correctly, or I don't have any syntax errors, let me see, I'll compile this. Okay, and if we run it, okay, so it looks good. We have our window with our file name, our text box, our load button, remove button. We still have a button in the center, which is taking up the whole JFrame width, and we do have a label down here somewhere, but the label is blank, so the center button is going to take up all of that space. There's no text set for the label, so we can't see it there. If we wanted to, we could just set some temporary text for the label. So for example, when we create the message label, I could just put in some temporary text just so we can make sure that it's appearing. So let's just say temp message, and if we compile and run, and there we go, we can now see that we've got this label in the south position, button in the center. We've got our inner JPanel that's added to the north position, and inside the JPanel that has a flow layout, we have our label for file name, text box, the load button and the remove button. In the next couple of videos, we'll begin to add the JList to the center, and we'll flesh out some of the functionality behind some of these user interface components.